Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the AJM Tax Baker Tilly Greenwood's 2024 budget review. So try saying that 3 times fast. A warm welcome to all our clients and colleagues from both firms, and then also a very warm welcome to our speakers and our moderator. We are looking forward to hearing your insights. The budget review event has been a highlight on the Baker Tilly Greenwood's calendar for some years already, and we were thrilled when the vet and the AJM team approached us to ask whether we wanted to collaborate for the 2024 budget. As always, dealing with the AJM professional staff was such a delight. For those of you that would like a CPD certificate, at the end of this session, there will be a table where you can write down your details so that we can make sure you get that valued certificate. For some of us, the budget speech may involve some to lots of emotions. Some of us may not have the expertise to really make sense of it. And some of us were on a plane for the entire duration of the budget speech, so we actually just want to find out what's going on. For all of that, we are looking to our esteemed speakers, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'm going to hand over to Karyn, the moderator, and the speakers will introduce themselves.
Thank you so much. Of course, I'm Karyn Maughan. I am a legal journalist and part-time accused person, but no more. 6 victories in a row, but he keeps trying. And I had the pleasure of introducing this panel here today. But what I've found is actually very effective, because I don't like reading bios and it's boring, is to ask my panel to introduce yourselves and talk about your areas of expertise in relation to the budget.
I have absolutely no areas of expertise in relation to the budget. My name is Albertus Marais. I am a director at AJM. I take a particular interest in tax-related matters, but that is about as far as it goes.
I'm Azhar, Varachhia, Managing Director of Alpha Plus Capital, multifamily family office predominantly focused on real estate development and SME investment in South Africa. Chartered accountant by trade, so typically tax is something that's very exciting for me. So happy to be here and give some comments on it and how it affects us in the business world.
Sure. I'm Simon Brown. I'm a teacher and a taxpayer, I suppose. I do lots. I teach people about money, radio shows, I write, I do stuff. I eat chocolate, drink wine, and wear socks.
That's a syntax, right?
Yeah, the syntax really, really hurts.
Sorry, condolences. Okay, so for people who have been on a plane and haven't watched the budget, can you each give us a sort of sense of your main takeaways from what Gonagwana was saying today?
So I think there was a lot of expectation, particularly in the election year. The election's announced, date was announced last night. And there was a lot of expectation that this would be an electioneering budget. There would be money thrown at social services, at big promises. NHI got $1.5 billion, which is frankly pitiful. I mean, our premier in Gauteng wants to buy 18 hospitals. $1.5 billion don't buy you nothing. And what we got instead was a proper budget. In other words, looked at the data, which is terrifying, bleak, scary, and said, we're going to do a budget within our capacity and ability. In other words, saying to the rest of the ANC, the ruling party, you've got an election to fight. You go fight that election. I've got a budget to do. I've got a book to balance, and I'm going to balance it. It was fundamentally boring, which is what budgets should be, and it was what's what I'm looking for. It was responsible, and it's a terrible word. But there was no wild, crazy promises. There was no VAT going up 0.5% or 6% or something. He kind of just very carefully crafted a budget together and balanced it, which is what you expect from finance ministers. And apart from a few weekend specials, we largely have had very good finance ministers for the last 25 odd years, going back to Trevor Manuel.
Azhar?
Yeah, to build on what Simon said, I think it was a boring budget. There weren't any big surprises. I think tapping into the gold and foreign currency or foreign exchange contingency reserves is not a surprise, but something that we could have expected. And they're going to manage that with the purpose of settling debt, and I think that's a big part of our budget, and it's about settling debt and bringing that debt to GDP down as much as we possibly can. And that's, I think, the main driver over the coming years. But we've been made promises about, decreasing budget deficits and decreasing debt to GDP ratios over the past couple of years. And we haven't really seen those promises being kept. So it will be interesting to see how that moves forward into an election year and how that will change over the coming years. And then also from a business perspective, what sort of incentives are businesses going to have to grow business or provide economic growth in South Africa, and more importantly, decrease our unemployment rate. I think that's a big challenge we have in South Africa, primarily driven by our economic growth, and that's something we want to see the government play an active role in supporting businesses with, whether it be in the budget or in certain tax instances.
Yeah, Karyn, for me, the budget is, and Simon, we've said it on panels before and in past years. What's interesting to me is what's not in the budget. It's a boring budget in that sense. Nothing big on NHI, no basic income grant, no nuclear, and all these electioneering tools absent. Also, though, from a tax perspective, no moves in tax tables, no increase in VAT rates, no increase in the fuel levy. What does that mean for us from a tax perspective? It means that we have, yes, tax increases, but tax increases, it's been called by stealth. Since that, you all know that if we don't adjust the income tax brackets for individuals, and by the way, that's our greatest source of income, is individuals, us paying tax. It's close to 40%. Little more, in fact, of the budgeted income of 1.8 trillion rand, if you'll believe it. There's no increase in the tax tables, meaning that effectively the tax rates are being increased, effectively by inflationary rates. But other than that, these one-pagers that we compiled beforehand, if you have a look at it, what's changed, it's very difficult to write anything in it because not much has changed. All that has changed, as far as I'm concerned, is inflation.
Isn't there a bit of a jarring discrepancy between what the politicians are saying and what the budget minister is doing? Because as you've rightly pointed out, we see Panyaza Lesufi saying they're going to buy 18, hospitals with a 1.5 billion rand budget, apparently. We've seen big promises about a potential nuclear reactor where, probably with the help of Putin. And we've seen a lot of rhetoric around NHS, NHI, all of this kind of stuff. So what do we make of that? Is the ANC going to make outlandish promises that it's not going to deliver on? Or is this a situation where we're going to see, as we did with the Zuma administration and other administrations, this huge push and pull between the Treasury and the executive?
I think we're going to get the push and pull. And I think what we've got, I think our finance minister has the support of the president.
Yeah.
He must have to have made this budget. You also, the other thing that he said on Monday was that the e-tolls debt is going to get paid. Again, that's not in the budget. So I think what we're going to get is that the ANC MPs looked at this budget and thought, whoa, that 29 May is going to be scary. But they're politicians, right? No, let's be clear, they're politicians. So they're going to go boogie out there and they're going to make stuff up. But it's just not in the numbers. Because quite simply, we don't have the money to do what they want to do. We don't have NHI money. We don't have nuclear money. We don't have money to pay off the e-toll debts. We just don't have, it's just not there. Yes, there's $500 billion in the foreign exchange gold reserves contingency. We can touch on that. I think it's important. But the money's just not there. And the finance minister held his line. He's talking to the other ministers. He's talking to President. And he's quite simply saying, you can tell the electorate whatever you want, but numbers don't lie. They can, but in this case, no.
Karyn, to me, it reminds me of, when you are awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and feeding your scrolling addiction on Instagram. And you go through these reels and you come across one of these reels, me when my partner says we don't have money to go on a vacation. That's exactly what the ANC government is.
Yeah.
The Treasury is that one spouse that says we cannot go on a vacation. The other spouse is the ANC government actually going on holiday where they can't. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. But who's gonna win? Someone's gonna have to pay at some point. Who's paying?
No, very quickly, I think, and I think we'll see in 2024, but it's going to come down to elections, I think. It's whether that marriage is going to survive.
Yeah, and I think it's very good to touch on Simon's point on the push and pull. It's good that we have a finance minister that is able to stand his ground and not give in to the party, even though it is an election year. And we've been through periods over the past 10 years where we've seen the finance minister give in, and we've seen the fiscal deterioration within South Africa. So it's good to see someone standing his ground and put another budget that is fair, is honest, and is talking to the actual numbers that we've seen and getting us to a better position in our country.
And I think who wins to the question? I think the finance minister wins because he controls the purse strings. It's not like there is a pile of money, the golden FX contingency reserve, but it's not like there's this magic wand. I mean, the money's just not there. It's not like he can say, well, I was keeping this for a holiday to Varachhia, but instead let's go to Paris first class. There's no money lurking nowhere. There's secret money. There's not levers that can be easily pulled. There's no quick and easy solutions from this. I used to do a podcast where people would come and they've got financial problems. And what do we want? We want to get out in a hurry. And the answer is there's no hurry here. This is a slow process, and we're in that process. Now, we're probably still going down rather than up. To your point, every year we get promises about debt to GDP, and they're never quite fulfilled. But even if things were doing better and we were on the up, I remember 20 plus years ago when it was Trevor Manuel in the Mbeki administration, and it was a slow grind to go from tough budgets in the 90s, getting them to balance to surpluses. It takes decades. It's not a quick fix. And the politicians, of course, they're worried about not decades. They've got a date on the 29th of May.
Well, I'm very happy that you're happy about Enoch Godongwana. But how long is Enoch Godongwana going to be in the job? Because I think that's the big question, is that when you see poll numbers with the ANC potentially getting below 40%, and you see this very uncomfortable alliance with certain factions of the ANC with the EFF, whose fiscal policy is, at the best of times, insane. What happens when we don't have Godongwana at the helm, we don't have that adult in the room, and we have an ANC that's willing to make promises with whoever, potentially, to stay in power?
We're in trouble.
Yeah.
I go back to Weekend Special, with disrespect to Des van Rooyen. No, I mean, there needs to be a gatekeeper. Back to your analogy, there needs to be in my household, my wife and I, she's the gatekeeper. She's the one who says, really? Now, I'm not trying to buy nuclear power plants or do national health.
That we know of.
Actually, a little nuclear power plant mightn't be the worst thing. But there needs to be the gatekeeper, and as soon as that cracks, then stuff can get really, really bad, really, really quick. I mean, I may always make the point. We're not a failed state. We are a struggling state. We're not a Venezuela. We're not a Zimbabwe. We're not even close to those for bunches of reasons. But we could be that. And the finance minister's been one of those folks who have kept us away from it, and many others, let's be clear, and civil society and journalism and the like, but the finance minister's one of them. And if we had a red beret finance minister, it would be bad.
And I think where the polls are going at the moment with the elections, it's hard to say whether the ANC is even going to have any say over who the finance minister is going to be.
Exactly.
And we can throw names out there, the Reserve Bank governor or Kuben Naidu, and those sort of guys who have the expertise to do so and have the resilience to fight against MPs that want bigger budgets. But at the end of the day, it's going to be out of the hands, I think, of the ANC as to who the Reserve Bank governor is, and they might have to make the decision, as we were discussing earlier, as to getting someone that's not an MP, using their 2 seats that's not an MP to effectively get someone into the finance minister position.
If I can venture a comment, and politics not my strong suit, but I think that we have a finance minister that is moderate, and we've had one that is moderate for the past, since the Mbeki era and even before then, for a reason perhaps. And it is perhaps because politically it is gauged accurate to have a moderate finance minister that pays politically. Yeah. Perhaps that is what the South African public wants and will reward politically. I'm not sure that the South African public will reward a political finance minister that is from the EFF. I think that is dangerous, and I do not think that it's only non-ANC voters that realize that. I think it's also supported by ANC voters. So I don't think, come past this election, we will necessarily have a radical finance minister. Of course, the chances are there. But I think Treasury, at this stage, seems to be institutionally entrenched in conservatism and will remain so post this election, irrespective of where the elections go. I don't think it's all of a sudden going to be this radical approach that we will have in the country. I just don't see us politically going that way and the South African public rewarding it with votes.
Yeah. I mean, I think one, and we'll move on from this topic, but one of the disconcerting things is that there has been a very deliberate and sustained tack on the credibility of institutions like the Reserve Banks, like the banks, by, amongst others, people like Iqbal Survey. The EFF have been very consistent in that. And we do have a history where Treasury and the courts were actually bulwarks against large-scale looting, mismanagement, malfeasance, and whatever. But I think we as public also need to be very concerted about our, understanding and attitudes, what's going on, because some of the biggest misinformation campaigns that we in media see are directed at banks, as what happened with that whole Rand manipulation story, which got, a couple of bros trying to make an extra bonus, got turned into banks trying to sink the value of the Rand, and was spread like wildfire, and is still being spread. So it's something that people must be mindful of, that there is this attack on the credibility, and it's not an undeliberate thing. Just moving on, Bourse has been very critical of the budget, and they say it is a budget of hopelessness, less than 1% allocated to job creation, illustrates need for change in this year's election. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
I think it's political.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, I think it is political, and I think job creation is not the job of the finance minister.
Yeah.
If Parliament wants to create jobs, they have the power to vote. Make policies that make jobs, make structural changes, fix Transnet. I mean, I read results from listed companies every single day, and they are being killed by two of the big state-owned enterprises, and those are respectively Eskom and Transnet. Shoprite spends 100 million rand a month on diesel. 100 million rand. Now, if they weren't spending that 100 million rand, that is profit. Conservatively, that's 300 million rand profit from Shoprite. And they pay some dividends, so there's dividend tax. This is just money that's been fundamentally wasted. Now, of course, the government scoops it because they pay fuel levy on diesel and all of that sort of nonsense and stuff like that. But Parliament is their job, not the finance ministers.
Yeah. If you look at I had a look quickly at our growth, our meager growth rate for the past how many ever years. Since 2012, the average now is at 0.8%.
Yeah.
And the problem is our population grows quicker than that. So in a net position, we're getting poorer as things go along. And it's not the fault of Treasury. I think actually Treasury deserves a lot of credit for how well they've done over the how many ever years. The problem is a systemic one with government not being able to implement on infrastructure to allow jobs to grow. The policies aren't wrong from Treasury. It's not fiscal policy. It's not monetary policy. The problem is that we don't have a government enabling jobs through infrastructure.
I mean, power, that's the biggest thing, right? Eskom and Transnet, power and logistics. And that's what's really holding business back in South Africa. It's deterring foreign investment. It's actually, at the end of to Simon's point, it's reducing revenue collection at the same time as well, to an extent. That's something that the government needs to fix if we are going to see revenue collection increase, as well as just not from electricity point of view or collection through revenue in that perspective for Eskom, but through businesses growing and establishing a higher GDP growth and in essence net taxable income for corporate South Africa.
And just if I can quickly add to that, there were some of the things there was no bailout for Transnet.
Yeah.
And in fact, the minister said quite simply, we've got a plan, and the plan doesn't require. Post office, I don't know who still posts letters, but the post office, no bailout for the post office. And here's a fun one. A year ago, excuse me, remember in the budget there was debt relief for Eskom if they did certain things, and they didn't. So what did the minister do? Take it back. I mean, he's a school teacher, for goodness sake. I mean, he's a scary man.
And they've done the same. They've done the same thing with Transnet now as well.
Yeah.
Same with. I mean, Triple P partnerships are supported now for Transnet, and that's one of their conditions. They need to engage with the private sector in how they're going to fix Transnet, and I think it's from 1st of May that private companies will be able to access the rail network in South Africa. So that's positive news, and I think we need to see more of that along with state enterprises and really the partnership between public and private coming together and reducing the burden to a certain extent, to a small extent, on the government or on the Treasury's balance sheet and putting it onto private. But government has been very resistant in that respect up until now, just because they want to control everything that is within the country.
The ANC is now promising that if we vote for them, they'll end load shedding, which in fact they caused, but we won't go into that. But is there any indication in this budget that there's, as you rightly point out, the energy crisis is one of the, I think, most economically challenging things that we're experiencing. Is there any indication in the budget of a plan outside of ANC promises to actually deal with the energy deficit?
I'm not sure to what extent it's going to deal with the energy deficit, but what is interesting is that this, perhaps it's to do with affordability, but perhaps it's to do with the idea that we're going to solve this crisis soon, is that these Section 12B and 12BA, these allowances they get for solar panels, that's not being extended post-2025.
Yeah.
So perhaps, they're expecting that we're at a crossroads really, irrespective of us being in stage 6 load shedding after the State of the Nation address. But that is the only indication that I got from it.
So load shedding is ending, but not because of Eskom, because you've all got solar panels on your roof,
yes,
and everyone's putting their own solar panels. Eskom is ultimately being privatized by stealth, and Eskom is over. And I've said it before, Eskom is over. In our lifetime, it won't exist, because here's how it plays out. More and more people, whether it be individuals or corporates, go onto their own renewables, etc., which means Eskom gets less revenue, which means they can't pay their debt. The only problem that we have is that they've got a giant pile of debt.
Yeah.
But Eskom is as a means of production, Eskom is finished, absolutely finished. And that's been true for many, many years. It's not, I don't believe, fixable. It's fixable by private individuals. And if you remember Gwede Mantashe, who wanted to do, was it 1 megawatt of private capacity, and then he got his arm twisted and he said 100, and then the president just said, yeah, whatever you want. Now, I speak to CEOs on my show. There isn't a CEO that I don't speak to who isn't doing something. The gold miners and other miners are building their own power plants. You go look above a shopping center, it is just solar panels. Eskom is finished. I mean, it's going to be out of our life and time. And industry and individuals are making a plan B.
Yeah, and I think I think most people in this room have the ESP app for your load shedding. And on that app, you can actually see, the amount of electricity generation by Eskom and the amount of the supply as well as the demand. And the demand is always outstripping the supply. And what it comes down to is that planned maintenance is always below or always in addition to unplanned maintenance. And the problem with that is when unplanned maintenance happens, planned maintenance goes on the back foot, and then it just compounds the effect of unplanned maintenance going forward. So I think to your point about not having load shedding, I think we'll still have load shedding, but the levels of load shedding will decrease because of all of us having solar and businesses having solar and alternative power generation. But Eskom's maintenance issues are just going to be compounded, and that's going to be the end of them.
I mean, I think you touched on it, and you brushed over it, and I don't think it's something that can be brushed over, is the debt situation with Eskom.
Yeah.
Because don't they represent the biggest fiscal sovereignty risk to South Africa? I mean, we owe the Chinese, what's it, $200 billion or something like that.
It's small change.
I
mean, I forget what
I'm glad you think
for you,
so.
Simon.
And now I can't remember what Eskom's debt is. At 400 billion, 240 billion, most of it underwritten by government. That is the problem. And what will happen is Eskom's going to get broken up into 3 different parts, and that will help, because the part that we do need is transmission, because we do wheeling. So you make power in the Northern Cape and you sell it to someone in wherever, Kwandegezi or somewhere like that. But it's that debt. Now, that debt is not going away. It can't go away. There was a plan for last year's budget to take some of it onto the balance sheet. Technically, it's on the state balance sheet because they're underwriting it, but even that didn't work. I mean, it's like someone comes to you and says, I'm going to help you manage your debt. And what do? Well, you take the credit card and max it out at the casino on a Friday night. That's essentially what Eskom did, right? And I mean, yeah, so the Eskom problem is not the inability to produce power, which is our problem, not Eskom's. Eskom's problem is that debt. And there's no clever way around it. And they can't default because, as I said, it's underwritten by government. So
exactly.
it's
So
just,
that money has to come from
yeah,
somewhere.
it's just limping along, and I think it's kicking the can down the road. Because how do you pay hundreds of billions of rands of debt? I don't know. I don't know.
I think realistically speaking, we have to kick the can as far as we can, or kick the can as far as we can down the road, right? And the reason being, if we can fix the fiscal issues we have now and reduce that debt to GDP and increase revenue collection, there may come a point in time where Eskom needs to be saved and the bailout needs to happen. And we will be in a better fiscal position and allow ourselves to that opportunity to do so.
It's not just an Eskom problem, as Azhar says.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a structural issue in the South African economy. And I don't think everyone really appreciates how much we're paying towards debt. I mean, our budget is 1.8 trillion rand, is the tax revenue. Of that, 20%, that is 360 billion rands, goes to servicing debt every year.
It's $1 billion rand a day.
It's incredible. It's $1 billion rand a day goes to servicing our debt. That is incredible. That's not the big cost, though. What is staggering, and perhaps just going back to the election year, I don't think we necessarily need an election budget, because what we have really is a structural election budget, really, if you look at it. 20% servicing debt, 60% to the social wage. I mean, that is a staggering amount. 60% goes to servicing hospitals, primary schools, paying grants. That is a massive amount. It is, to a very large extent, a welfare state. Measure that against the number of taxpayers that we have. And that is my personal concern, is the tax base. I look around me and I know the tax affairs of a number of people here at so happens.
How to scare an audience.
What is amazing is that we have, as I said, our biggest contributor to income is personal income tax. That's 40% of this 1.8 trillion rand, individuals. Of that, 40% of that 1.8 trillion is contributed by 200,000 individuals.
Sure.
That is the number of individuals in this country earning more than 1.5 million rand a year. 200,000. And that's personal income tax. I'll tell you that those people are also responsible for VAT. Those people are also responsible for driving companies and corporate taxes. That is, if you think about that, 200,000 people, then the brain drain that we all know of, our families and friends moving to Australia and the UK and the rest, then that figure becomes terribly scary quite quickly. 10,000 people in this country earning more than 5 million a year. 10,000. You know, that is, to me, that is staggering. That's something to keep you awake at night, not Instagram.
and that comes to the point where the solutions to our budgetary problems lie in Parliament. And I'll give you an example. Gwede Mantashe, Minister of Mineral Resources and the like, and I forget the exact number. You might know, 2,000 odd mineral applications last year, number approved?
Yes.
0. Not 10, not 100, not even 1,000. 0. 2,500 applications. Every single one of those generates jobs, generates spending, generates VAT, and makes for profit for Treasury. Didn't pass one. Now, truthfully, if we all went in there with zero knowledge, we could pass a dozen by the weekend. Because really, how hard can it be?
But is the difficulty not that we have become so entrenched as a society to a politicized civil service that we don't have the kind of technocratic individuals in positions to actually make the system work efficiently? I mean, I think it was Netherlands where the whole government just resigned and the place kept going.
Yes.
Now, can you imagine that happening in South Africa? where everyone's sort of cadre deployed, and of course now the DA's lost his case today.
It's not unconstitutional.
Yeah. It's not unconstitutional. But, there has been a push, for a depoliticization, and there's been legislation approved by Cabinet to address that very issue, to say we need people to sit there who are experts going through those licenses and saying this person is an appropriate person, let's tick that off.
We've become used to it, I think, but I don't see it changing overnight, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't know what the solution there is. And I think pretty much like everything in this country, we just hopefully need to wait it out, and then absolutely in time it's going to change. We are forever on the precipice of disaster, said, was it Jan Smuts, and never quite there. And hopefully this is one of those things. But I absolutely agree with you, Karyn. If it's not something that we structurally address, it is going to be a problem. The other thing that worries me on that is where are we going with a number of posts in Treasury that need to be filled quite quickly, and whether those are going to be filled by capable people. We have this deputy governor of the Reserve Bank position that's been open for pretty much a year. Edward Kiesbetter is coming to the end of his term quite soon. Who's going to take over that role? We've had competent people in the past taking these roles in Treasury, but one's always scared of what next. And that if cadre deployment starts really getting its roots into Treasury, I think that's not a healthy position to be in.
We talk about competent people just within government and being able to attend to the jobs that we all need them to, but what came out in the budget today was that government's paying 1.2 to 2 times more for laptops and monitors and all of those sort of items. It's absolutely ridiculous, I think, that no one is actually sense checking what they are paying for. Although it might be a small number at the end of the day, it just talks to the sort of culture that's entrenched within government and cadre deployment and people benefiting from government contracts. It's just, it's unacceptable.
Well, I think the difficulty, you spoke about the need for infrastructure to sort of drive employment and, but the problem is that all our infrastructure projects have been total disasters. Look at Madipi and Kusile. That is an absolute joke. You couldn't make a worse power plant if you were a 2-year-old using Play-Doh and trying to erect like matches inside of it. That's how bad it is. And unfortunately, I think that, every time there is an infrastructure, it's exactly what you're talking about, the culture of the 10 Rand glass that's being paid 200 Rand for. Thuli Manetsela is one of the people, and she was public protector, who documented that stuff. And of course, we had a public protector who wasn't really interested in that so much as going after Pravin Gordhan. But the reality is that we have this real issue with a sort of functional systemic democracy that works, where people can understand that the state is working in their interests and not in the interests of the ANC. And that's why I think this election is so game-changing. And one of the things I find very interesting is that there are a lot of people who say, well, maybe the ANC should get 50% because, we're scared of the EFF. Is it a thing where we actually need a radical shift, or is it a case of better the Satan that you know than the Beelzebub that you don't?
I'm not going to venture into politics.
I think it is, and it comes back to what we said right up front with this budget, and Albertus, what you said around, we largely have a history of fairly conservative finance ministers, and that the populace, the South Africans, are by and large, I think, happy with it. Now, let's be clear. There's a lot of South Africans who are, they are so far below the poverty line that
it's 57%.
And there is poverty out there which is just absolutely terrifying. But there's a sense that the populace isn't going to win it. But to your point, do we need a change? We do. The cadre deployment. I get why that happened post 27 April 1994. 100%. Made perfect sense. It was a need, it was a requirement. But it needed to be, and if the older folks in the room will remember, there was some tax, like a wealth tax back then. I forget, I think it was 2% or something like that. But it was very clear that it was going to be for a limited period of time, and that the money was going to go into a particular place, particularly RDP housing, and the populace were like, that's cool, like we'll pay out 2%, whatever it is. But it because there was like an end date to it, and it just never ended. And you know, it was this, and then it was that, and it's just that continual going on. And to your point, there's just a DNA of, well, this should cost 100, but I can get away with charging 200, and that's become completely and absolutely entrenched. And you don't get rid of that slowly. You get rid of that with a giant big knife and painful surgery.
Yeah, and I think in terms of infrastructure development, and you discussed it earlier, how we're going to get this right. I think the public-private partnerships are really important, and I think that will not only bring expertise, it will bring the proper oversight, the proper governance, and in all other aspects to the infrastructure projects that we need. And from there forward, we'll be able to see where funds are actually being spent and being spent in the right place, and make sure that the government is being fiscally prudent, and these private companies will hold them accountable.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And just on the utilization of the gold reserves as a mechanism of funding, I mean, what do you make of that?
So, I don't fully understand all of it. Like, there's parts that talk about sanitizing or sterilizing, and I don't get that. And he was a little light on some of the details.
It's 150 billion rand.
Yeah. So there's 506 billion in these reserves. So how it builds up is that 20 years ago, the Reserve Bank, as around the world, they go and buy dollars, they go and buy gold, and they keep that as reserves. We've got $60-odd billion of reserves. But they bought those rands at 10 to the dollar, and now it's 19. They bought that gold at $400, and now it's 2,000. They've made a paper profit. Any of you invested in the stock market, you fully understand the concept of a paper profit. There have been times where we've had paper loss. So December 2001, Rand hit 1361, and over the next 4 years strengthened down to sub 6. We were 20 billion short, and Trevor Manuel paid it in. So the money's been paid in. But now we've got that paper profit, 506 billion, and I mean, who does it belong to? South Africans. Who has control of it? The government of the day. Now, we can debate whether it's a good government of the day or not, but what he's essentially doing is saying, we're going to take 150 billion of it, call it a third, we're going to use it to pay down debt, it's going to save 30 billion, which is over 3 years, which is 10 days of interest payments, so let's not get too excited.
Yeah.
But I think it's been used responsibly. I think it's been used very well. And again, it comes back to our finance minister. 2 years ago, we had 150 billion rand extra because of taxes, because of a commodity boom. All those Sabanya and Kumba were paying insane dividends, making insane profits. And instead of sort of spending it and quickly building a hospital or 18 or something nonsense, paid down debt. I think it's a good use of it. The mechanics of how we do it, do we print rands? And it's not inflationary because we've got the asset offsetting it. Do we sell ZAR into the market, or dollars rather for ZAR? Do we sell gold? Unlikely. I don't know how that works. There is a risk that next year a new finance minister comes along and says, hey, whoopie doopie, there's still 350 billion left. But in the budget today, I thought it was a good use of what is, in essence, it's a rainy day fund. And you know what? It's raining outside.
I don't believe there to be particular risk in using it, especially to settle debt. I mean, that's other governments around the world do it, and I think it's fair enough that South Africa finally does it, but for the main purpose of settling debt. And I think international markets will look at that as a favorable move. But to your point, there's 500 or so billion available, 150 to settle some debt, but there's also 100 that goes towards the South African Reserve Bank. So it's 50% of the reserves effectively being utilized. With a forecast depreciation of the rand in the medium term, our reserves should only get bigger and bigger. I don't think there's going to be any appreciation in the rand against major currencies. So I don't think we'll be in a position anytime soon to what Trevor Manuel did and have to repay into that reserve account.
I would like one extra point, which is where we actually formalize the process, i.e., every year we look at the surplus and 10% gets given to the finance minister. But put a process in place because there certainly was there must have been discussions of why only 150 when there's 506. You know, put something in place almost to protect ourselves from
Tina Jumat-Peterson type
from
scenarios.
future finance
Well,
ministers.
the feeling I got that it's going to be a once-off scenario, and I hope that it will be. Maybe 10 years time it gets reassessed, but I hope that it is just a once-off and that we see actual improvement in our debt to GDP going forward, not only from this but from revenue collection as well. And it won't spark us the interest to actually let's tap in again, let's see where we can get funds from, because that's not what we want to see. We want to see an organic growth in revenue collection and an ability by the government to service its requirements as and when needed. And I know we haven't been talking that positively recently, but I think a good point to note is that there was a primary surplus this year, and that's the first time since 2008, 2009. And that's your collections versus your expenses, except your excluding your debt repayments. And I think that's a positive sign for the government, and it's a move in the right direction. And as long as they can keep that going and building on that, I think we stand in good stead for the next couple of years.
On the income side, I agree that it's to a very large extent, and I know our tax revenues are below what was budgeted. But we are certainly seeing, I think, well, not I think, you can see it in the numbers, that the tax base is growing slowly but steadily. And we had last year a negative tax buoyancy, which means that the tax revenues don't keep up with growth in the economy. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means that we're keeping revenue in the public, and the public can spend it to make more money. I mean, tax, if anything, is a damper on economic growth. The fact that we have tax revenues keeping up, even if only just then with economic growth, that's a fantastic thing. We see in the budget that SARS's efforts in modernizing its systems are paying off. The compliance dividend, yes, has slowed a little, because I think we've had massive compliance dividends simply from proper enforcing from when Kieswetter became commissioner. And that trend seems to, that is system building, and that will continue. I remember that Commissioner Kieswetter, when he just started the job, said that SARS is nothing else really than a massive artificial intelligence machine. That is what it is. It's a computer-driven system that needs to be implemented. And in practice, I can tell you that we're seeing that come through, and with great success. There's also, again, as in past years, some extra money being allocated to capacity building within SARS. If you just have a look at LinkedIn and follow SARS's page, they are constantly recruiting, and not people for the call center. They are recruiting heavyweights in terms of professionals with a string of degrees and professional qualifications, and that is certainly, I see it at least, that bolstering their abilities. So I think from a revenue collection side, there's not much to be concerned of. And I think from a policy perspective in the budget, again, we see, everyone's tax rates have been increased. VAT is kept steady. That's a tax on effectively the middle and lower class. Income tax rates are being kept on hold, which means there's bracket creep not for the 45%ers only, but for everyone.
Yeah.
Revenue is not the problem. It's always going to be, at least with the current government, in my view, going to be on the expense side, and how we keep to that policy. And
to your point on SARS, I think they're doing a fantastic job.
Yes.
And I think you'll agree, and you've seen it over the past 4 or 5 years, just SARS scrutiny on all taxpayers in South Africa, and the amount of questions they ask and the amount of disclosure that you need to make, it's become quite cumbersome in recent years.
To put it lightly,
they're
yes,
actually
but,
more efficient in law enforcement than the NPA is. I mean, they're the ones that are like putting up cameras in the Mazotti's factories and really upsetting the cigarette traders.
Yeah.
But they're getting their money, And that's, I think that's something, and they are, I know they are trying to get prosecution. There's a discussion about that. But they're effective in the space that they operate in.
And it's almost about just what you were saying. If we, and we can't, but if we could sort of remove the whole Zondo Commission and everything that was reported there and stuff, and if we just said we're in a tough space, and that happens from time to time. I got friends in the UK, and like they are having no fun either.
No one is. The whole world is screwed, guys. Don't worry. We're not the only ones.
Oh, for one, they don't have sunshine, right?
We're not the...
Elon's going to take us to Mars.
Yeah.
But if we remove the stain of corruption and cadre deployment and overpriced laptops and the like, and look at the situation that we are in right now, you raise a great point. It's not Venezuela or Zimbabwe. Yes, there's lots to worry about. Yes, there's an election and all of that sort of thing. But we had a very, very good budget that was boring as we require. We have, it kind of feels like the adults are running the place rather than the kids. And then, of course, you go and look at Parliament and it looks different. But it's not the horror story that it's very easy to make it sound like it is. And if we hadn't have had 20 or 30 years of abject corruption and cadre deployment, we could still be in the same place, but it would just feel so much different. And it's that sense of in part, betrayal by the liberation movement, and in part just betrayal by the government who, whether you voted for them or not, are there to make our lives better and have been making theirs rather than ours better.
And also, to your benefit, you guys live in the Western Cape, and those of us in Joburg know that you can have water, electricity, and Wi-Fi, but you can never have them at the same time. So be grateful where you live. Okay, I'm just going to open the floor up to some questions if anyone wants to ask something. I think there is a roving mic. Or is everyone happy? We've just so comprehensively covered it.
Thanks, guys. Much of what you had to say, nobody can argue with, but there's a lot that you need to introspectively take a look at intellectually. The idea that we're indebted and the large chunk of money that goes to interest, it goes to our pension funds. We are not Argentina that has USD, or the majority of our debt is not in USD. It's rands. It goes to our pension funds. Gives you an idea why the pension funds are effectively 1 times our GDP. Our market cap to GDP is 3 times. And about 40% of that market cap is in pension funds. And they are hoovering the interest. So if you really want to bring in a bit of tax, you can start taxing the pension funds. That's where it is. If you own shares in Mr. Price, and at the same time you bitch about the grant, you are not joining the dots. PEP, Mr. Price, Lewis Stores, all of this stuff, it moves straight from government through a privatized middleman to the individual, straight back into Pick and Pay or Checkers or PEP. So you need to look at the first, second, third, fourth, fifth order consequences of what you're discussing.
I agree with the statement. I remember 2009-ish, maybe it was 8, and Trevor Manuel did a big boost to grants. And not to be over capitalistic about it, I'm like, folks, go buy ShopRite. The money goes into the economy.
The velocity of money.
Yeah.
M2 times the velocity of money is GDP. You wonder how we're keeping our head above water with corruption. It's because the velocity of money stays inside the economy. The problems are Magrupe Kusile, which are non-productive capital expenditure, and money that left the country. The 50 billion rands that goes inside the taxi industry ends up with Toyota and Tiger Wheel and BP and Shell. It circulates. All it must do is not leave the country.
Cool. Does anyone else want to, or you can come talk to us afterwards while you munch a sandwich outside, because I think people are hungry. You're like, we're so over this. Okay. Thank you. If anyone else, if you want to come talk to us, we're available, but otherwise go and just enjoy the rest of your evening.
Just before everyone gets up, okay, stand in the light. Just before everyone gets up, so Simon, we just want to help with your wine drinking problem and paying too much syntax. So we've got a small gift for all of you to say thank you. The gift is from Baker Tilly Greenwoods and the AJM team. So thank you very much. We found it very insightful, and there's definitely a few clever remarks I'm going to use at my next bride. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.